a brief overview over the agenda. We will start with the refresher, explaining what TREEO Cooling is. Then we have Hans-Peter Schmidt from Ithaka Institute for Climate Strategies explaining the cooling concept. Then Matthias Matzenberger from CSI International, also Carbon Standards International, sorry, about the standard and the global pre-CSync standard. And then we will really dive deep into the TREEO Cooling and yeah, explain the concept. So I think we are now complete, and I will share the presentation. 1 second. So the stage is yours, Stefan. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Vera, and welcome everybody online and here on site in Stuttgart. If you're in Germany, you know we have a special day. It's quite slippery outside. So if you stay home, it's probably the safest place you can be. But of course, we appreciate everybody who's here, because then you get also excellent cake. I just had a piece. I'd like to start with a very short refresher of what TREEO is all about, or if you're new to TREEO, that you know what TREEO is doing. So TREEO is a climate tech startup, started here in Stuttgart as a carve-out from the NGO Fair Ventures Worldwide. We are active in Indonesia and Uganda, and what we do is we bring radical transparency with single tree monitoring to afforestation and reforestation. And we do this with 3 technical elements. On the left hand, you see our TREEO app. In the middle, you see our TREEO cloud. On the right side, you see the TREEO impact dashboard. So these 3 elements are explained a little bit more in depth. The TREEO app is the tool that's used by the farmers or monitors in the field. You take a picture of a tree, the app measures automatically the diameter of the tree, and from that we calculate the tons of CO2 this tree has sequestered in lifetime. And this we do for every single tree once a year. It brings in the transparency that's unique in the market. This data is collected in the TREEO cloud. So here you see a map with a lot of green dots, and each of these green dots is a tree. And with each of these measurements, we have an overview of all the data, and we combine this in plots and management units. And here we can then manage the overall data we got. Just shortly before Christmas, we welcomed our first new digit coming up. We have now 1 million measurements in our TREEO cloud. It was a major milestone for us, and it shows our system is scaling. And last but not least, if you are one of our customers, and we call our customers balancers because they have a real strategy behind climate impact. You don't want to see every single tree once a year, because then you have thousands of millions of trees in your dashboard. Therefore, we have a better way to give you an overview of what is the performance of our forest, and this is our so-called impact dashboard. We're also offering our technology as software as a service. Most of our customers buy carbon removals, but as the technology can be also used by other tree planting partners, we offer this way too. Oh, there's an animation problem here. I'm missing some logos. So, okay, we have here we present our business model. We connect 2 markets. On the left side, you see customers who are serious about climate change. And you see the logos of the companies who agree to be shown publicly, but we have more. And how do they get a transparent and a trustful carbon removal? Yeah, this we connect with the other side of the market, with growers. In this case, we do this in Indonesia and Uganda. So here our customers are tree planting organizations who reach out to thousands or even 10,000 or 50,000 of farmers. They know how to run a nursery, they know which tree species are growing in the right place. And with them, we do the afforestation and reforestation. So this two-sided business model is on the left side. We charge €4.25 for an annual ton CO2. It's a different concept. You explain it later. And on the grower side, we upfront pay the seedling production and the planting. And in return, we get the real data from the field and the biomass that is sequestering CO2. So we have, we connect our customers, and we also have now a 7 tree planting organization under contract, but more to come. So we're also scaling on this side. So how does this sequestration of CO2 work? So a forest and the trees capture CO2 from the atmosphere, store it in their biomass, and in long-term storage, because we all know trees and forests are not permanent. We're looking to put them into a storage called timber, timber construction. So a lot of the wood can be stored for 50 or 100 years or even longer. And the residuals can be stored as biochar. That's a process through pyrolysis, where you then get biochar and you can use as a soil enhancer to improve the performance of your agro and your forestry systems. And of course, we also look at other benefits. The so-called co-benefits look into social impact, food security, and also biodiversity. The standard you will see later, promoted by Carbon Standard International, also have a mechanism to depict biodiversity. And we also test the waters if we can charge more money with also including biodiversity into our carbon removal products. Yeah, but overall, we are distinguishing ourselves with rigorous transparency. So we believe trust can be only built with data, and this goes down for data for every single tree. Yeah, this was a short intro, and now you have to take your seatbelt, sharpen your eyes and brains. Now Hans-Peter will start with this presentation.
Yeah, exactly. So I will stop sharing and invite you, Hans-Peter. So I'm announcing Hans-Peter Schmidt from Ithaka Institute for Carbon Strategies, who will tell us about the concept of global cooling services and what is behind. So please share your screen.
Hello, does this work? And can you hear me?
On the bottom, the little monitor with the flash, we can't hear you yet.
Can you hear me now? No.
Great.
Yes.
Yes, you can hear me?
But we can't hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Now I have to go back to. Okay. And like this is a big screen, you can see. And you can hear me. Okay?
Perfect.
Good.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation. Stefan told me some weeks ago it would be great if we have some time and you could explain this rather complicated system of temporary sea sinks and how to calculate cooling services. And I said, okay. And then now I have 15 minutes. So this is what is probably supposed to be sufficient to explain everything. You will tell me in 12 minutes if I did my job. Sorry if it goes a bit too quick, because we need some basics here. So when you emit CO2 into the atmosphere, this CO2 will not stay there forever, or at least not everything of it. So CO2 is distributed to other carbon pools, first into the quick carbon pools, which are the oceans, and the biosphere and the pedosphere, which is the upper part of the soil, and also the anthroposphere, which is the built environment. So like after 100 years, the CO2 that was emitted, they still do global warming, but only like 38% of it. The other carbon went to these other carbon pools. And then you get this distribution to the other pools for longer and longer, but it will take more than 1 million years after the models that in fact you would not have any CO2 of this initial emission anymore. Now, this is, I think, is very clear. So the CO2 does not decay. It's not split into carbon and oxygen. Is just it does get distributed to these other carbon pools, as you can see here. And now what is important is that when we say we create a carbon sink, that means we have carbon removal from the atmosphere. So you take out some of the CO2 from the atmosphere, and that, which means you do this process of distribution, you do it quicker. You take it out and you put it in the anthroposphere, or like when you build something from carbon, or you grow trees, so you increase the biosphere carbon pool, or you make biochar and you put it to geological carbon sinks. So the effect is you remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And what you create is like a type of hole in the atmosphere. And from these other carbon pools, from the ocean and from the biosphere, now carbon dioxide moves back to the atmosphere to fill the hole. In fact, you have the ocean and the biosphere and the atmosphere that are in a carbon equilibrium. If you change the carbon content of one of these three pools, the other two pools tend to balance this. So when we saw in the beginning this diagram from an emission, you have in fact the same reaction if you have carbon removal. So you see on top this blue line, this is the carbon dioxide that remains from an emission, let's say of 1 ton, which is above the x-axis. And now you create a carbon removal at the same time. So you extract carbon dioxide 1 ton from the atmosphere. And so you have a distribution from your 1 ton of emissions into the other carbon pools. And the other carbon pools fill up the hole that leaves the carbon removal. And both are in balance. So you have the same effect of 1 ton of carbon removal and 1 ton of carbon emission if you keep your 1 ton of carbon in the biosphere system, or if you keep it out of the atmosphere. So that is, it equals each other out. And that's why we talk about long-term carbon sinks, because only if you have a long-term carbon sinks, and that means more than 1,000 years, you're sure that your carbon removal can balance the effect of the emission. The global warming effect of the emission can be compensated by this very long-term carbon sink. The problem is now, what do we do if we have only a short-term carbon sink? Let's say we look to the blue area here. We have an emission, and it is distributed like 62% of the CO2 is distributed to the other pools. So you have a global warming effect of your emission. Now you create at the same moment a 1 ton of carbon sink. You have a removal, you maintain your sink for 100 years. And for those 100 years, there is no net climate effect between the emission and the sink, they balance each other out. But now after these 100 years, you lose your carbon sink, and that becomes an emission. So what in the end you have is, in year 100, you are at the same point as you were in year 0, because now you don't have any carbon sink anymore, and the sink that you had is lost. So you have a delay in the global warming effect of your emission. And that is the reason why climate scientists and policy, they only want to have very long-term carbon sinks, because otherwise it's only a delay in your climate action. However, during these first 100 years, the effect is the same as if you would have a long-term carbon sink or only a 100-year carbon sink. And we can check now the system of shorter, even shorter carbon sinks, those temporary carbon sinks that we may know from intensive forest plantations, like 10 years. So what you do here, you have an emission, the blue line is again 1 ton, and you have a removal of 1 ton. And during the first 10 years, it's the same thing. It balances each other out. It's net zero, but then you lose your carbon sink, and that means your climate action was to delay the global warming effect for 10 years, right? But you could now, after these 10 years, recreate the same size of carbon sink again. You do another removal of 1 ton, you keep it for 10 years, then the carbon is released, and you do it again. You do another 10-year carbon sinks. So you add temporary carbon sinks, one after each other. And if you do this, like for this example, every 10 years for 100 years, the effect of your 10 temporary sinks would be the same like one 100-year sink. So if you renew your temporary sinks, you can have the same net effect on the climate as with longer term carbon sinks. So, and that is mainly the basis of temporary carbon sinks. We calculate the global warming effect of the emission, and we calculate the global cooling effect of the carbon sink or of the carbon sinks if you have several. And then you check if the global warming and the global cooling effect over a given time is the same, and it means net zero, and when you do need to renew your carbon sinks. So if you check now what's the difference between global cooling services and CO2 offsets. So CO2 offsets is you do one action now and you repair the effect of your emission forever. And that means the trader sells a carbon sink for eternity. Now, the question is, who owns real estate for eternity? You create a carbon sink and someone owns this carbon sink, but then let's say in 50 years, someone else comes and say, yeah, but you sold 50 years ago. I even don't know who was it who sold it, this carbon sink for eternity, but I have to take care of this carbon sinks. I want to have some money too. So that was not just that there's only one person who got it in the beginning, and now for 1,000 years nobody gets paid for its work. Now this is a trouble on how do you trade carbon sinks for such a long time. On the other hand, the most carbon sinks, they are mobile, so they don't stay at the point where you create it. Imagine you grow a tree, but then you cut the tree and you keep the wood, but then the wood is in a house. So the carbon sink is not in the forest anymore, but is in the house. Or if you have biochar carbon that you put into soil, but in the end, it will be washed out and is in the ocean. So who owns the carbon sinks? It's in the public domain, but who got paid for it and who guarantees the maintenance? So how does this fit to property rights and to the laws of the market economy? We don't see how this could fit into the current economic system. It may fit into kind of more communistic-like system, where Big Brother takes care of everything, but in a more liberal society with property laws that are respected, eternal carbon sinks do not work. That's why if you have a global cooling service, it can integrate the effect of carbon sinks, of temporary carbon sinks, and you calculate only the effect for next year, or if you want for the next 5 years, but not for eternity. And then the advantage is every year you can control if the sink is really there or if it was only an empty promise. So you can control every year, and if the sink is still there, you sell the service as a global cooling service and not as a sink for eternity. And if you have a temporary carbon sink, let's say for 10 years or for 20 years, during these 20 years, this temporary carbon sink has, as we saw, the same effect as an eternal carbon sink. The only thing is, this is a generation contract, and in 20 years, it has to be renewed. Or if you buy or sell temporary carbon sinks for 1 year, you have to renew it annually. So the global cooling services, as we call this, so this is really the climate service. So you pay, let's say, the energy that's needed to cool down the effect of an specific emission. If, for example, you emitted for the last 30 years, every year 10 tons, then you know the global warming effect of these 300 tons of CO2, and you can calculate the amount of carbon that has to be removed and stored for next year, and the year after it has to be renewed. So this is the example that you can see here. You have 15 years of emission. It can be emissions of a company or of a person. And every year's emission has a decrease because the warming effect decreases over time because of the distribution of the CO2 to the other carbon pools. And so you have an absolute or accumulated global warming effect of these 15 years of emissions. And now you can check what you do to compensate this effect. And now we have here this same line. This is the red line. You have these 15 years of CO2 emissions that go up to an absolute of something like 120 annual tons of CO2. And you compensate it with the plantation of a pine forestry, let's say 1.5 hectare of this pine forestry, and it grows for 35 years. And then it's just an example. You cut it down to pyrolyze it, so you lose half of the carbon again. And now you can see with the blue line the global cooling effect at every given point in time, at every year, how much cooling this system of growing forest and transforming into biochar has. And with the dark red field, you see what you can compensate, or how much of your sink effect compensates the entirety of your emissions year per year. So, as we said, 12 minutes is not a long time to explain everything of that. If you calculate that the current market, 1 ton of CO2 forever costs 150 euro. Let's say 1 ton CO2 carbon sink for 1 year costs 3 euro, which is like 150 divided by 100 years, and we double it because it's more work, more administration, more certification, and you get this short-term effect right now. So this is an average price that we think should work and that you get an imagine. And as a last example, how this may work, you have in the red methane emission. This is a point emission, and this methane emission has a global warming effect. But methane is decayed in difference to CO2. So you have a decay that happens during the first something like 12 years. So you create global cooling products to compensate for the global warming effect of the methane emissions. And that has to be done within the first 20 years. So you have different possibility. You have like the yellow square. You have cooling over 20 years. With the black line, you have a biochar carbon sink, short-term carbon sink. And so this is within the effect of the entire sink. So part of it can be used to compensate the methane emission. But you could also do it over 6 years if you use the entire effect of your biochar carbon sink for these 6 years. And the same thing works also for tree. So you have the red line is the global warming effect of a methane emission. Now you plant bamboo plants. So in this example, you had something like 8 ton of CO2 equivalent for the methane emissions. Now you plant this 13 giant bamboo plants, and they have an exponential growth curve. And after 6 years, you cut the regrowth, you cut away, so you still have your bamboo forest for 20 years. Now we can exactly calculate how much these 13 giant bamboo plants can compensate with their global cooling effect. And we can calculate for any kind of emission the number of trees that are necessary, or it is in the register, as Matthias will show you in a second, that you measure the carbon that's taken up by a forest, and then you can match it to the effect of an emission. So I think my time is over, and I'm looking forward to listen to Matthias, who will explain you how this works when the carbon sinks with their global cooling effect are registered in the Swiss Carbon Register. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans-Peter. You made a good transition to Matthias Matzenberger from Carbon Standards International. And yeah, I just directly hand over to you. Would be nice if you would not take longer than 10 minutes. So please go ahead.
Maybe I can compensate some minutes. Yeah, great to have the possibility to talk to you guys. I hope you can see my screen. I'm Matthias from Carbon Standards. I'm responsible for our global C-Sync department. So what I will talk about today is how what Hans-Peter just now explained with the global cooling, how this is visualized also in the global C-Sync registry. Just have to okay, yeah. So we at Carbon Standards, we have different focuses, let's say. So we definitely come from the point where or it all started with biochar, so with EBC, WBC, all together with the Ithaka Institute, and also with seasons coming from biochar. Together with TREEO and with Ithaka, we developed the global tree seasing standard. And as you see, we also have other parts, for example, for climate balances at farm levels. Maybe to start with, I want to introduce you how the endorsement and certification process basically looks like in global tree seasing. So it all starts with the seasing manager and its project. So at the first of all, we have the approval of the project plan by CSI, by Carbon Standards International, and the approval of the planting and biodiversity plan. Later on, we have the endorsement process of the seasing manager by Carbon Standards and the endorsement of the DMOV system. Like, for example, for TREEO, it's the TREEO app. In the end, when everything of this is done, we have the certification and on-site inspection and certification by a certification body. Most of the time, this is covered by Ceres cert. I also explained, or what the basic answer of my presentation should be is how do the global tree seasings get into the global seasing registry. So it all begins with the tracking with the DMOV system of TREEO, for example, where we can track the product, the trees, and also the seasings. After that, we have the registration into the global seasing tool, where also the certification body has the possibility to enter. And whenever the seasing units are registered, we have a validation process, or the Ceres cert is doing a validation process. And when this is covered, we have the automatic listing of the seasing into the global seasing registry. And we can then retire the seasings via global cooling services, for example, as a seasing trader. The global seasing registry actually enables us to do a public and transparent presentation of the seasings. We will see this later on a little bit. Also, it shows us different persistent curves depending on the methodologies. For example, this is different this is different when you talk about a seasing from biochar, and if you take a closer look about the seasing from tree seasing. And it also gives you further information regarding the project, emission backpacks, ownerships, GPS locations, and so on. Now what we can see here is a screenshot out of the registry, and we have a biochar seasing. For example, in this specific case, we have 0.46 tons CO2 equivalent, which is applied into the soil with biochar. And with the green line, you see a decay of the biochar over the years. With the purple line, you see the persistent part after 1,000 years of the biochar. So this is also available, this CO2, this seasing, let's say the 0.35 ton CO2 equivalence is also available after 1,000 years. And now we can say, as Hans-Peter also mentioned, this is for eternity. So we can take this 1,000 year part and do CO2 offsets. But then still we have the semi-persistent part right here between the green and the purple line, which can be used, for example, year by year for global cooling services. When we then go to a seasing, to a tree seasing, we see that the persistent curve is slightly different. There we start from the bottom. This is the green line, that's the active seasing. For example, in this case, it's 0.055 ton CO2 equivalent, so it's pretty small actually in the beginning. And you see also the yellow line, which is basically the expected seasing curve. So now we can say this active C-sink can be used for global cooling, and the expected C-sink curve can be used as a security for long-term contracts with buyers and so on. And now this is, for example, just for 10 years, but if we have a certification in the second year, we have this green line is getting bigger and bigger. And then again, we can use these parts also for retirements, for global cooling. And whenever this is gray, this also shows that this has been used as a retirement. And what we also see here is after, so we also always have like the expected curve for 10 years. So if we go back for the first year of certification, we see that this is for 2032. So till then we have the expected curve, and in the next year it's 2033. And yeah, it would be the best if this line is always matching, but maybe in the future this calculation or this expected calculations will be slightly different to the active C-sink, but that's something we will track with the DMOV system, with the TREEO app in this example. And this is actually my presentation. I hope I could explain, give you some further information about the global cooling and how it is visualized within the global C-sink registry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias. We will have time for questions in a second, but before that, I would like to introduce and welcome Dr. Amini Hasnaoui from TREEO. She's our carbon director, and I will again share our presentation. So 1 second. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Vera. Hello, everyone in the room, and hello to everyone joining us online. I hope you can see me and hear me clearly. So yeah, I would like to take you shortly through actually a summary of what differentiates the global tree C-sink.
Amini?
Yes.
You're not sharing the screen yet, sorry.
Oh, sorry, that was my mistake. Thank you. Can you see it now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Maria. To share with you a bit about a summary of what can differentiate or distinguish the global tree C-sink from existing traditional CDR standards like gold standards, Vera, Plan Vivo, etc. Of course, the other standards are evolving, they are releasing updates, but still we see some points that are differentiating the global tree C-sink. So it's summarized mainly in 6 points. First of all, if we talk about the durability, so for the global tree C-sink, we have more talking about trees that are standing in the field. So as long as they are standing, we can talk about specific durability. So there is a kind of time tag on the projects. However, for the other standards, there are claims about durability up to 50 years. This is how the projects are designed, without having actually the right mechanisms to make sure that this project will stay there for this period of time. The second point is the type of the carbon removal we are talking about. For the global tree C-sink, we are talking about the global cooling effect, as explained by Hans-Peter. Also, as long as your trees are standing, you have this cooling effect happening. If your trees are cut or disappeared, then you cannot account for this beyond. While the traditional credits, as mentioned before, they are assumed to happen once and forever. So you calculate the project potential of carbon and you sell it, and you assume that for a project design of 50 years, your carbon is completely removed. The third aspect is the carbon accounting. So we are talking here about a yearly accounting of the cooling effect in tons annual tons of CO2 equivalent. While for the other standards, we are following this long-term average where we have, as I said, a design and we just average the potential of carbon or CO2 removal out of it. So it's also linked to how we measure this carbon or how we account. We have the MRV system. Then for the global 3C sync, we have the orientation toward establishing a digital MRV system. Now we have the TREEO app that is accredited as an application or digital MRV system, while for the other standards is more based on sampling, is still the case. There are some standards making efforts to make this like some new MRV system or digital MRV system, like Vera with the census-based method, but actually it's not mandatory. It's just for small areas, and it's not like tree species related or precise. So yeah, that's the MRV, and we have also the timber harvesting. So in the global cooling service, this is not is completely forbidden. Let's say we cannot cut the whole area. So we need to keep the equivalent of 40% of the CO2 standing in the land or in the project area, while the other standards are open to different designs, including the clear cuts. For the project emissions accounting, for the global 3C sync, it's a separate thing that we do. We calculate them separately, and we are obliged, or it's mandatory to compensate them through permanency sync, like biochar. While for the other standards, when we do the design from the beginning, we deduct what is supposed or estimated to happen as emissions from land clearing or from using fertilizers or pesticides. But there is no also clear requirement or mandatory requirement to compensate them later. So yeah, that's the main points that we see as differences. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Amini. So, and now is the time for questions and answers from the audience here in Stuttgart and also online. So please raise your hand or type. You can also type in the chat if you have questions about all the three presentations we had so far. The cooling concept is not the easiest to grasp, so please go ahead. We have one question here.
Maybe
Tillmann?
I hope I understood it right, but if I have, is this a microphone? Yeah. If I have, like you said, I have 1 ton or 1,000 tons per year of CO2 emissions, and it just stays the same level. I just imagine. Then every year I have to compensate 1,000 tons. Every year I have to make a new contract about 1,000 tons, for example. And after 10 years, the first contract runs out, and I have to renew it because these 1,000 tons are still there. They are still to be taken care of. So after 10 years, or every year, in the first year I pay like 30,000 euros for 1,000 tons, and the next year I have to pay 60,000, and it adds up. and it always goes up and up forever.
Yeah, if you continue to emit, then the price that you have to pay
Yes.
will increase every time.
Every
So
time, and then
if you stop emitting, price will stay same.
but forever.
But
So
forever.
like
And-
after 10 years, I have like 300,000 euros per year, if I thought,
Mhm.
and then I stop, no more emissions. But this 300,000 euros per year, I have to pay forever, like in 1,000 years still.
Yes.
It doesn't become less. It stays.
But the difference is that if you buy a permanent carbon sink, you pay already today the price for the 1,000 years.
Yes.
So in the temporary sink, you still pay in 100 years.
Okay.
But in the traditional system, you pay already today for your rent in 100 years.
I understand that, but then I have to trust that you still exist after 100 years.
Yes, and this
Otherwise, I will be taken. And if you get bankrupt, I have to pay it again.
no, you don't pay
because I don't
no.
have the proof that the sink is still there. So I think it's. I know I have also thought about this, but I think it's. This will need a lot of regulation internationally or at least nationally to handle this system, that it runs because you can get bankrupt, I can get bankrupt, and then for example, and I cannot pay so much money, yeah, then what happens? So I think this is I haven't understood still. So that's the thing.
If someone goes bankrupt, it doesn't matter so much because you had your cooling, so this is done. So if TREEO goes bankrupt, it doesn't matter because then you buy your annual cooling at another place. If you go bankrupt and you don't want to continue, then you cause the global warming. So there's nothing lost. It's just it is transparent what you get and what you buy.
Thank you for the answer, Hans-Peter. I would like to add something, an aspect. We also expect, and hopefully we will have other solutions in some years, like 20, 30 years, that allow us then for a lower price than we have now to buy long-term solutions. But for now, the goal is, or should be, to buy us some time, as I would like to put it, to even be able to reach this point where we can switch to longer term solutions, which are mostly not ready yet, and so on, just as an addition. And thank you for this relevant question. Anything else? We have
a couple of questions online.
Please go ahead.
So on the chat, Ramon Bacre asks, I am working in Mexico designing and or just let me ask, Ramon, would you like to ask your question yourself and you can unmute yourself? Otherwise, I can read it out loud.
Yeah, thank you. I can do it myself.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Well, the question is, working with smallholder producers, how to implement these standards, these new standards, and in a tropical context with soils, with biochar production, and the social complexity in these countries. Do you have like some methodologies already cooking, or how to start implementing them here?
So I will start answering. So we are working often with smallholder farmers, and we are working through so-called TPPs. Those are our tree planting partners. So they are taking care of the trainings and everything that has to be done to be able to work with small communities, for example. So Is this already an answer to your question, or? Yeah, we are present. So we are working at the moment in Indonesia and Uganda, and we also have offices in those countries where we are working. So in case there are questions that our tree planting partners can't answer, can't help with, we are on site. That's important for us as well.
Okay, thank you. I will contact you like individually to ask some more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Who's next?
We have one more intervention here. Vishal, please correct me how to pronounce your name. Would you like to unmute yourself, or should I read out your questions?
Hi, I can do it myself. My name is Vishal, and I am an inspector for the artisan C-Sink in India right now. And I wanted to ask my question, which was based on the methane mitigation that is supposed to be done by the artisans on ground for the biochar that they produce. And the activity that is mentioned in the artisan standard is to plant trees. So can the tree C-Sink standard with TREEO come into application in this aspect?
I will.
Yeah, it is designed for this. So with the new artisan standards, the updates, it is required that the trees that compensate for methane are also controlled and certified following the tree standard. And now we created some tools that makes it easier also to calculate the amount of trees that are necessary to plant, for example, for a given amount of methane. So, but it's clear when you use trees to compensate methane, these trees have to be certified.
Thank you. More questions?
I have a question to.
I will hand you over the microphone.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Philip from Steel. Thanks for the camera and the microphone. I have a question to Amini. You presented the table, yeah, with the different standards. And my question is, the other standards also have a business plan on it. So I think they should also move somewhere. Do they develop or redevelop their standards, or what is their plan? Do you know anything about that? How they adjust?
Yeah. So mainly they're kind of hearing, of course, all what is happening and the criticism coming to them. However, the steps are really still slow, let's say. So when reading this, for example, step toward the MRV update, it's still far away from, for example, covering big forested areas. For example, they say if you want to apply this single tree or census-based measurements, it's not beyond 1 hectare or urban forests and not for big areas. And also the fact, given it's still the option to have sampling, and it's the same as more digital MRV or more precise MRV, is also not binding. So they're responding to the requirements a bit, including some improvements, but it's not in the high speed. That's what we can say. Thank you.
Thank you, Amini. Are there more questions that we can answer here?
We have one new question on the chat here from Rafikul. Would you like to unmute yourself? Otherwise, I can read it out loud. It says, I am joining you from Bangladesh. If global tree C-Sink will be implemented in my country's context, how it bears sustainability in my country, give an effective suggestion, please. Could you maybe clarify a little bit, or I'm not sure if I got the question.
Let me open the chat for the audience here.
Yes, you can use it.
Yeah, so Stefan, you want to answer?
So the Carbon Standard International put the standard out for usage worldwide. So you can take the standard and go and implement it immediately. So that is the perspective, I think, from Carbon Standard International. From TREEO perspective, we are not active in Bangladesh. But if it makes business sense, we always look at new countries. So if you have interesting areas for tree planting and also the amount of carbon we can sequester. So in our business plan, we have 100 tons of carbon per hectare as a limit. What we need also to be commercially successful, then we can talk. So just contact us.
Thank you. If there are no more questions for the moment, I would move forward with the next part of our webinar. If there are, please raise your hand, go ahead. But we will also have a short question and Q&A session in the end. So now we would move forward with the concept of TREEO cooling. This time I will share my screen and hand over again.
Share the presentation.
Oh.
Just the top. Oh, the top. With the presentation. Yeah.
Okay. Please go ahead, Stefan.
So let's do a small audio chat. Can you hear me well? Can you see me well too? I have to move this camera a little bit back. Okay. So now comes a little bit more details how we do the cooling at TREEO. And I think it's always important to state that there are 3 strategic options, and carbon removal is one, and typically also the priority, the last one we're looking at. First of all, if you run a business, please check how you can embrace circular economy. We do this also at TREEO, so we don't only look at forest, but we also look at biochar, timber to make this a circular economy. Then, of course, the next step is that you reduce and avoid emission, and then the remaining emission, then we talk a counterbalancing. And this is what this presentation is now about. But it's important to state that because if we just look at the last element as the only solution, we will not make this climate crisis and tackle. First of all, we have to avoid CO2, methane, and others. So, as you might know from the press, there was a lot of press last year internationally, but also here in Germany, that, oh, be careful, this doesn't work. Let's move here. This way? Okay. That a lot of the carbon removal projects and certificates in the voluntary market do not keep the promise. Actually, at TREEO, we were aware that there's a lot of out there that is not really delivering what is promised, but the magnitude of that, 97% of today's certificate don't remove CO2. This was also astonishing for us. And one reason is that this voluntary market and the standards we saw before, and you saw also Armeni's comparison, we were not really believing that with these standards, we can make a very transparent and honest business. That's why we are so happy that together with Ithaka Institute and Carbon Standard International, we now have a standard that does it very differently. And the loss of trust in this market you see best if you look at the collapsing of pricing. This is a factor of 10 within a month or less than a year. And to be very honest, if you want to run a carbon removal project with $1.60 per ton CO2, you cannot achieve really anything. So it's not really possible to have a real effect on that. And you see also that most of these projects even do not pay the farmers in the countries they are in. So we provide now TREEO Cooling. Cooling is based on the global tree seasync and the cooling service introduced before by Ithaka and Carbon Standard International. And the simple slogan we have is that you pay for the proven climate effect that's cooling. This on a yearly basis. So how does it work? We plant trees in tropical areas because there the trees grow fastest, they capture biomass and CO2 therefore quickest. You have two types of forests, production forest and conservation forest. Production forests are usually criticized because they assume not to be so healthy for environment. But you see, if you look at the performance per hectare, production forest, if you are limited in space, is a good alternative. Of course, conservation forests then for 30 or more years stay longer. Then after planting, we measure the growth of the trees. And if trees are big enough, typically after 2, 3, latest 5 years, with the diameter of the trees of 2 to 5 centimeters, we then can do real carbon accounting because we can measure the DBH, the diameter at breast height of trees, calculate the biomass and the CO2, and this we report then to you the sequestered carbon and the cooling effect. For production forest, and the big question is always, what happens after 10 years? And the first element that also was mentioned before, with the global tree seasync standard from Carbon Standard International, clear cut of forests are not allowed. So 40% has to remain on the forest. And we model this that we do clearing of a forest in the cycle of 3 years. And in these 3 years, we also replant. So that means the forest stays intact. Of course, our strategic goal is to use the biomass in timber construction, because then it's locked longer away. Has also other effects, because there we also save carbon emissions in terms of cement and steel, also a huge impact there. And the wood residuals, we already pulverizing to biochar. This is true for the baseline that we find on the plots where we plant, but it's also for thinning and pruning biomass. So now we come to one of the questions we had. How do I now account for my emissions in this model? So if you assume you have emissions of 1,000 tons in 2023, how does this look like? So the black bar in this chart shows the emission in 2023 to 1,000. So it's time from left to right and the emissions from top and to bottom. And then the red bars are what Hans-Peter introduced already, is a reflux effect. So this is the CO2 that is still in the atmosphere and causing warming of the planet. The light red ones is the one that's observed in other spheres. So what you have to take care is, so it's not like that every year you have to take care about 1,000 tons. After 10 years, you're better off, it's just 700 something. So you have an effect. If you buy, example, for 10 years carbon removals, you don't have to rebuy for 1,000 tons, but less, because the reflux effect helps you already. Of course, you want to buy a carbon counterbalancing services, a cooling service, what we call it, that is matching exactly the emissions you're causing or the warming effect you're causing. So the red bars, the warming effect, and the green bars, the cooling effect, should match every year. And then you're fine. And as a customer, it's something we want to offer as TREEO, that you buy these bars every year and you don't care if this is a new forest, existing forest, whatever it comes from, just your accounting is done. It's similar like your, I don't know, your Kreditsparen and Bausparvertrag, where you simply pay your monthly fee. This we do a yearly fee, and then it's taken care of. Now I have some examples of forests, how they are modeled here. This is a teak production forest in Indonesia with a rotation cycle of 10 to 13 years. Here it's modeled over 30 years. The green bars overall are the biomass accounted for in CO2 that we find on the plot in that year. The light green element on top is the reflux effect. Remember, also, Hans-Peter said, also the carbon sinks have a reflux effect. So not all the carbon that has been sequestered is also cooling the planet. Some of them is basically also lost, but the ocean also takes care. So only the dark green elements of these bars is something we can use for cooling, and then we can offer as our customers, this is cooling service. After year 10, you see the effect of cutting forests. This is done in 3 steps. As mentioned before, we're not allowed to do clear cuts, so we cut in 3 years and replant in these 3 years immediately. And this is then the performance, the cooling performance of a carbon sink. And as explained before by Hans-Peter, in our case, you don't buy the carbon sink, you buy the cooling service of the carbon sink. It's comparable, you don't buy a car, but you lease a car, which is also legally a different concept. As you know, as we cut trees, we want to move them to longer-term carbon sinks in timber, but also in biochar. This is an example for a conservation forest. This is a mixture of fruit trees, also in Indonesia. It's in this case in Java. And here you see that also the reflux effect is taking in there. 30%, 1% of the overall biomass after 30 years we cannot account for as cooling the planet anymore, because it's with this conservation forest you have longer time span to cover. This is a forest that is still growing. We also see conservation forests that also level off already in tropical areas after 20 or 25 years. This will also happen here probably after 40 years. Then the forest reach its maximum capacity, and it's also lowering its cooling performance over time. So it's also, I think, important that with the cooling service, we can model also long-term effects of forests, something we cannot do with the other standards as of today. So now I come to the reflux calculation. All this calculation has to be done, not in Excel, because we found out it's a little bit too complicated. So we start doing this now really in software, in Python code. And the reflux function is called impulse response function. So that is the response of the planet or the atmospheres and the oceans and the other spheres to, if we emit 1 ton of carbon, how does the system work? And as I said before, after 10 years, you still have 69% of this left over. Half-life, and this is similar to what you know from plutonium, cesium, and others. It's a similar process that's happening here. Is after 39 years, and after 100 years, still 37% is still there. So if you buy this short-term carbon removals, you win time, but you also win this effect. So after 10 years, you don't have to rebuy the 1 ton, but only 69% of this 1 ton, so 6.9 tons. And after 1,000 years, still 16% are there. So we all have to change our wills, because we will also inherit carbon removals as companies and also as a person. So the formula for the impulse response function you see here. This is from the publication you see below. And yeah, it's a little bit of math. So if you don't like math so much, assume this is an advertisement section now. I wake you up when we continue with the other charts. But for everybody who's more in the science or in the engineering side, I can explain this formula a little bit more detail. So you see it's an exponential function. It's not only 1, actually it's 5, adding up 5 exponential function. And the main parameter is t, that's time. So it's a function of time, and the ERF is a percentage value, as you see. Yeah, I come to this question later. It's a minus t, that's why it's an exponential function falling down. The parameter tau, you see also the parameters down here, is modeling this reflux function in different time span. So the first time span you see is A0, that's the first parameters. This is the effect of that at infinity. So if you think at infinity years, there's still 0.008% of the carbon in the atmosphere. Then we model the formula around 68,000 years, 5,000 years, 300 years, and then the short one is 6 years. For a computer, this formula is no problem, calculated very quickly. Understanding why this formula makes sense, you have to read the paper. This takes a little bit more time. So now everybody who doesn't like Mac, you're welcome back to our charts. So here you see the current TREEO portfolio. So all the projects we now are planting, that's a project in Uganda, Indonesia, we put together because we sell this as a portfolio. And you see a lot of these effects we saw before are levering off. The dark green is again the part what we can sell as the TREEO Cooling. There's one new element in these charts. These are the gray bars. This is the risk buffer. As you all know, nature-based solution, they have the problem of fires, flooding, seedlings not growing the first year. So we account this with the 20% risk buffer. This we don't sell so that we have some contingency left if something goes wrong. And things will go wrong, we know that. This 20% is always taking off. In the standard, we can ex post, means once we know the trees are really there, reduce this risk buffer to 5%. So we haven't made a decision at TREEO yet if we should do that or not. But also, it's interestingly, in the standard, you can also sell carbon removals in the past. Because if we proven that we have removed certain tons of CO2 in a certain year, we can also sell it years later. So it's also an interesting product that you go back to the future and sell things from there. Yeah, so matching this portfolio with coming back to this 1,000 ton of emission, the chart you've seen already, that's the same one. In practice, doesn't look so easy that these bars match every year because trees are growing. Forests are not there in a full flowing huge trees. They have to grow from small to big. And how do we do that for this? We do this counterbalancing over 10 years. So the sum of the red bars, or the sum of the green bars is the same, so that it's equaling out. The warming and cooling over 10 years is then leveled off. If the portfolio is already there, the trees are growing, we can also match these charts. But if you invest into a new C-sink, what we have to do right now, because we have to re-afforestate and afforestate, this is the effect we have in there. Yeah, and what does it mean financially? It's also a question we had already. Overall, for this counterbalancing of 1,000 tons, we at TREEO charge around 35,000 euros. So you mean this might be 35 euros per ton? That's not so easy because we have a reflux effect in there, and so it's not really a linear approach. What we basically sell for is 4.25 euros for an annual ton of CO2 equivalent. So it's this perspective on a year. This is also taking the decay into account. And our business model is, as you probably know, if you talk to us about our contracts, that there's an initial phase, 50% of upfront payment to install the carbon sink so that it exists there. We go to nurseries, we plant trees, we build up the infrastructure, we also check the land for eligibility. So most of this work for forests has to be done in the first 1 and 2 years. And then after that, we have a 5% service fee to operate the C-sink. Then what happens after 10 years? We will offer you to extend with a yearly fee, but you can also go, of course, to other providers of cooling service. So it's not that we are bound to that. And hopefully in 2033, we also have other cooling service products in our offering, not only tree C-sinks. So, but the world is a little bit more complex. You don't have emission only in 1 year. You have typically, as an organization, you have emissions every year. And here we have an example of an organization which has 1,000 tons of emission in the year 2023. You also see the distinction between scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Most organizations, scope 1 and 2 emission is something you have a handle on, where you can do something about. But scope 3 is something you have, most cases, limited influence. And here in this example, we model that scope 1 and 2 emission goes down to 0 by 2032. And then from then on, you basically deal as an organization with scope 3 emissions only. The green bars depict that your ambition, and this is something if you work with science-based target initiative, you typically hand in such a plan, and then you discuss with them whether you implement this plan or not. You also make a statement about the removals. In this case, we counterbalance our emissions 100% with removals. And now how this is now modeled in the cooling service. And you had exactly the question, now it's getting expensive. And you see why it's getting expensive, because you have to aggregate all these emissions from year to year. This looks like this. So the dark black bars in the bottom here, these are the gray bars we've seen before are the emissions. You see the cumulative warming effect of this emission is much, much higher than just looking at the emission itself. The good thing is if you buy removals, the same effect, the reflux effect, also takes place. As long as you buy and counterbalance every year the warming effect, you're also fine. But if you don't do this, you pile up with that. Yeah, and in this case, the matching of a cooling portfolio can look like this. This is really now the TREEO cooling portfolio we would then adjust for this kind of scenario. Yeah, it's more expensive, but to be honest, it's also more honest, because it's really what kind of effect you have on the temperature of the planet. And I think we had a very interesting quote from one of our customers who said, I pay more for my Christmas party than I buy for carbon removals, and I run an industrial company. There's something wrong. And I think we all feel that these low prices for carbon removals, they don't really take into account the externally correct. Yeah, and we believe the cooling service does. So in this case, the pricing model, you would have with the same mimic, 170,000 euros overall, with an upfront payment of 85,000 euros and 8,500 euros every year. So this is the multi-year scenario over 10 years. It's a little bit more expensive, but I think it's still doable, right? Yeah, then there's a big difference, as Armeni explained already, how emissions are handled in the TREEC sync. First of all, emissions have to report it also to the registry, and this emission include the preparation of the land, we call this baseline emission, removing some shrubs. There's also a requirement to keep trees intact. So if there are standing trees, they have to be proven that they have been there and also later there doing monitoring. And this monthly emission collection includes the forest management, if there's used fertilization, the transport, and the fuel, electricity that's needed for that. So these emissions are managed completely for you by TREEO. So we take care that these are counterbalanced with C-sinks, and we are using biochar to do this right now. So you don't have to take this into your scope 3 analysis. We do this for you directly, and it's also priced in. Yeah, so looking at the benefits of TREEO cooling and the cooling concept overall, it's a certified product, and the single tree monitoring based on scientific allometric functions gives us the proven and the transparency we need to make a change in this market, which is prone to not good transparency right now. It's effective. We're asking for 35,000 euros to counterbalance 1,000 ton of emission. Of course, you can also buy a DAX carbon removal for 1,000 or even more euros per ton. then you have longer permanence. But we think having a short-term effect, that scaling gives us time, is a better value for the money. That's why it's more effective. It's also scalable. We at TREEO, we have our business target in 2030 to go to 0.1 gigatons of CO2. The time frame, the IPCC scenario requires about 4 to 5 gigatons in the lower scenarios and up to 12 gigatons per year removals from a nature-based solution. You see that even the IPCC is scaling up their demand a lot. Right now, it's only 2 gigatons. And just in Uganda, we have a potential of 0.2 to 0.8, in Indonesia up to 2.4 gigatons. And globally, the sky is the limit. There's a study from ETH Zurich. They assume that's 205 gigatons CO2, but it's a high uncertainty. It's between plus minus 30 gigatons in this study. We also believe that investing in forest as a carbon sink is a good value for money. With a risk buffer, we take care about the nature-based solution risk, and we have a lot of co-benefits. I hear very often the counter-argument that forests need a lot of space. They don't, because people live in forest, animals live in forest. You can have all villages in forest. You can do a lot of other things there. So they don't really occupy space as such, like a production site for ducks where you have a fence around. This is really occupying space. So we also believe, and I like the flock, that's Maria's flock for biodiversity. Yeah, Maria, it's your heart. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's coming to an end. We can make a difference. Please join TREEO. For us, it's an historic opportunity to have an answer to this climate crisis. The TREEO service has an immediate impact with a nature-based solution. And with the cooling service, we solve the permanence problem of the short-term sea sinks. And this is a game changer because every year we can make a new buying decision and adjust accordingly what carbon removal fits to us as a company and also what is offered in the market. Yeah, and I'm very proud that we are reaching this point. For a startup, it's a major achievement. Now we're just waiting for you as customers to scale with us. Thank you very much. And now we are open for questions.
So we have a question from Sven in the chat. Sven, would you like to unmute yourself?
Oh, I was just asking regarding this reflux effect and the question how permanent or how stable this effect is, given the fact that also climate and temperatures are changing, and Hans-Peter mentioned the ocean as the most immediate source to sequester carbon short term.
Yeah, this question I'd like to hand over to Hans-Peter.
It's ping pong, right?
Yes, it's very interesting. So there's the biosphere takes up a lot of CO2 every year, but it emits also CO2. And in the last 250 years, in fact, but the biosphere did not increase or decrease. So it didn't. The destruction of the biosphere, or the partial destruction of the biosphere, was recompensed by faster growth through industrial agriculture and fertilization also of forests. But in fact, the biosphere does not take up CO2 anymore. So all the CO2 that is lost from the atmosphere in this reflux function, it goes to the ocean.
And how does the capacity of the ocean develop with rising temperatures? Is this something to increase the reflux effect or to decrease the reflux effect?
It will rather decrease. So the problem will be exacerbated if we don't act fast. The natural pools, they will not be able to capture as much carbon dioxide. So also this this reflux function is a model, and because of the anthroposphere, and because of our action, in fact, we actually modify the reflux function, and it's not clear yet. So let's say the reflux function is how it works when we are not there. But as we see that the biosphere doesn't take up any CO2 anymore, it's not so clear how we can predict the reflux function into the future. But we know from absolute numbers of how much CO2 was emitted and how much CO2 is in the atmosphere, and how they are distributed to the different pools. We still know that not all of the CO2 stays in the atmosphere, and that 60% of the CO2 emitted since 1750 is transferred mainly to the ocean.
Thank you, Hans-Peter. There is one more question here. 1 second, please.
Just to get a little understanding of where this CO2 lands. Is it in the sediment then, or where does it stay? In the ocean.
Yeah, it's carbonic acid. So it's part of it will react and to carbonates, and then it goes the geologic way, and then it's in the sediments. But mainly it's dissolved carbon.
Yeah. So it's more acidic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Are there other questions? There were.
Yeah, we have 2 more questions in the chat. Sven, do you want to unmute yourself again, please?
No, it's a weekend I was just thinking about the leasing concept. If this has any favorable tax implications for companies like leasing cars or something like this. This is also something you have looked into, which might make the whole thing more favorable, for example, for companies.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And we talked about this to certified public accountant already. And what they suggest is that we are defining the setup phase I mentioned before with the 50% upfront payment as a one-time thing, so that we can account for it in the first year already in order to deduct it also immediately. If you look at the overall effect of this service, the tax authorities could argue this is a thing that goes on for 10 years and you can only deduct it in 10 years. But if you define this as this is an activity to set up and we have costs like this, and the service we're providing is a forest that is growing, this is an effect that's taking place in 1 year. So if we do it that way, it has the advantage that we can basically write off 50% of the cost in the first year. On the other part, the yearly payment, I don't see such a big difference. We also have some customers who say, I don't care about this yearly payment, too complicated, I buy this upfront immediately. But depending on also which country they do their the bookkeeping, it might not be possible. If you do this as a company listed on New York Stock Exchange, you then have to distribute this cost over 10 years. It's pretty clear. With IFS, you have to distribute it. Whereas German Handels, HGB, is more favorable of companies to write it off immediately.
Thank you, Stefan. We are a bit over time already, but I would still like to have the last question from Ron Steinherz. Would you read it, Maria, please?
Yeah, so Ron asks, if you compare the total price for cooling over 30 or 40 years and compare to a typical PCS or GS credit price, does it not end up being 3 to 5 times the price?
You can do that, yeah. It's even compared to some of certificates 10 times the price. So it's more expensive. So for one reason why TREEO is more expensive, we bring in transparency. We measure every single tree once a year. This has, of course, cost implication. But I don't think it's so much linked to the standard or the cooling service idea. It's more about if you run a real project and you don't want to pay only the certifiers coming from the global north, but also the people, the farmers who do the real work in the countries, you end up with such a pricing. At the COP last year, we did a presentation to share what are the real costs of these projects in Indonesia and Uganda. And if I remember right, it was in Uganda, it was just the cost was €5 per ton. It was 8, 7, yeah. And in Indonesia, it was about twice as much. So if you get a certificate that is cheaper than that, then you get something that's below cost. And then you cannot expect that this is scaling and that farmers in these countries are happy to do business with us. They rather plant mangoes and bananas and make more money with that. And to be honest, they solve our problem because we are responsible for all the emissions the last 150 years. It's not them. So they have a global footprint. People in Uganda has less than half a ton of CO2 emissions per person. And we are asking them to help us. Yeah, then we have to pay for that. It's very simple. You cannot ask them to do a donation for us. So that's why I think this price point we see in the market is not really justified for multiple reasons.
Maybe I could add there. I don't see that it's double price or triple or quadruple price. In fact, if you compare it to carbon sinks that are traded over 100 years at a current price of $150 to $200 the ton, then if you calculate the annual price, then this is absolutely in the same range. But before you had two prices. You had the price for forestry or tree carbon sinks that were not true carbon sinks because they are for 30 years or let's say 25 years or 20 years, and it's not assured if they are. So that's why you get them at a discount. But what you should compare is the carbon that's in the sink and the removal that's done, and that should be the same price option for all carbon sinks, be it direct air capture or biochar or enhanced weathering or trees. They should compare to each other. So if a tree carbon sink is 10 times or 20 times cheaper than a biochar carbon sink, then there's something wrong in the value proposition.
Thank you, Hans-Peter. So I think we have learned a lot. I hope so. I hope you enjoyed our first TREEO webinar. More to come. Thank you for attending. And if you have further questions or need more information, want to get in touch with us, we are happy to answer all your questions. Please contact us. And yeah, thank you. Have a nice afternoon and evening. And hopefully see you soon.